Welcome to the Christian Atheist, where faith and reason fuse in the incarnation. Episode number 148, The Content of a Scientific Revolution, Part 2. As we saw last episode, Darwinian evolution's plausibility rests on increasing complexity arising from greater simplicity by natural processes. Complex life from simple life. This is the theory. But what does simple life look like? The answer? In the 165 years since origin, we haven't found any. As Darwin's black box, the veil of ignorance that gave the theory its plausibility progressively unveils its contents to microbiologists, we are discovering that even the simplest of single-celled creatures is mind-bogglingly complex. When a cell was just a little bubble in the microscope that somehow split into two and aggregated to construct complex organisms, evolution seemed plausible. These simple little atoms might, quote, by numerous successive slight modifications, spontaneously come together by natural processes in a variety of ways to produce the incredible biodiversity that makes up our world. Sure, it is immediately counterintuitive, and we may have to make a lot of other assumptions to make the theory workable. But who knows? It might work. And what a scientist means by work in this context is that the rational theory would be empirically verified, that the living cell, some living cell, would be simple life. None are. Pick any cell you like, eukaryotic, prokaryotic, or any of the so-called archaea. The more we learn, the farther simple life recedes. If science is built on testable predictions, the most fundamental prediction of Darwinian thought, that the complex evolves from the simple, is cast into serious doubt by modern microbiology. Life is not simple at any level. If anything, we might safely conclude from the evidence that complexity is lost as we move from micro to macro scale. The observed complexity and diversity of life that surrounds us, that which Darwin sought by reductionistic reason to explain, is, contrary to everything evolutionary theory predicts, dwarfed by the complex engineering marvels found at the cellular level in all life. We must remember that science is not just telling a rationally compelling theory, but testing that theory against empirical reality. All of science depends upon reality correcting theory, and not the other way around. If just for a moment evolutionary science could remove its ideological blinders, it would see far more evidence of design on the micro scale than we all observe at the macro scale. We should remember how Richard Dawkins characterized biology in The Blind Watchmaker. Quote, biology is the study of complex things that seem to have been designed for a purpose. In other words, Darwin wagered against common sense and that which has been historically evident to all of humanity, that the evidence that would be uncovered concerning the nature of cell biology would correct the common sense view, just as the discovery that the Earth orbits the Sun corrected our notion of sunrise. He wagered that we would discover a simple basis for life inside the black box of the living cell. He's losing the bet. The mystery does not resolve in simplicity, as his theory requires. Instead, it gets more mysterious and ever more complex as our technical science improves. Yet despite the evidence, like all of Marx's followers, and I would argue that Marx and Darwin are ideological siblings, evolutionary theorists continue to double down on a losing bet. To be fair, they believe they have no other choice. For them, there is no other way to understand the data. And they have invested everything into not just elaborating the story, turning it into a comprehensive cosmology, but also in discovering empirical validation for it, come what may. I have been told numerous times, evolution is not a theory, but a fact. The problem is that many of evolution's theoretical predictions have simply fallen apart as the evidence comes in. We could mention here all the failures of the 19th and 20th centuries on the transitional fossils in man's origin story. We could mention the contemporary discovery that the genetics of Neanderthals and Denisovans show that we interbred with them, exposing the story of evolutionary divergence 500,000 years ago as a myth, not a reality. Their genes are present in each and every one of us, meaning we interbred. The conclusion, accepted grudgingly, became inescapable. We are all the same species. Stubbornly, humans remain humans in the fossil record, and other primates remain, well, other primates. We could discuss the problems of abiogenesis, the idea that life originated by natural processes from non-life, an idea so fraught with problems that evolutionary advocates would like to divorce it from their theory, but cannot. Its problems are insurmountable in terms of probability. Instead, I would like to present a side-by-side comparison of parallel predictions of creationist and evolutionary models on human genetics and cell biology, as this information was decisive in my turn from belief in evolution. There are so many important problems for evolutionary theory that I find it difficult to fasten on just one. But let's look together at what one would expect to find when looking inside Darwin's black box, assuming the truth of each theory. First, from an evolutionary perspective, as we said above, we would expect to find simplicity at some level. If not, the simple to complex story, mediated by numerous successive slight modifications, would, again using Darwin's own words, absolutely break down. We would reasonably expect to find, as a Darwinian signature in the cell, a bit of a mess, as vestigial remnants of outdated equipment would necessarily still litter the landscape. Remember that the evolution of life is a process of random mutations in the genetic code, with natural selection as the mechanism by which those mutations are chosen, becoming part of the active expression of genetic information in the organism. Every new complex life form on this view is built on a hodgepodge platform of thrown-together genes from simpler life forms, some of which are functional and passed on to future generations, and some of which must be passed over or turned off in favor of what is beneficial. What else? Following on this point, we would expect, as, in fact, evolutionary advocates claimed erroneously to have found, a huge collection of non-functional genetic material left over from the long history of the random, undirected genetic trial and error process that is evolutionary history. In other words, we should expect to find a vast amount of wasted space and material in the cell and useless information in the code. Junk DNA. We would expect to see a history of failure after failure in the random alterations of the code, as the coding system itself would be a haphazard assembly of parts, and most definitely not a finely tuned language of precise meanings, complex interactions, and multi-level bidirectional information storage. In other words, evolutionary theory suggests that the cell should resemble a functional junkyard rather than a precise, immaculate factory, with neither wasted space, nor excess material, nor obsolete and broken down equipment. What would we expect to find if God did it, from the perspective, that is, of a biblical creation model? We would expect the opposite of a junkyard. We would expect a highly ordered, precise, and functional genome, optimized both for the preservation, maintenance, and inheritability of genetic information. We would expect an astonishing level of plasticity, variability, and compensatory complexity to be built into the basic framework of life itself, so that not only was the original design perfect, but it also allowed for, or anticipated, a wide range of possible alterations and permutations, fitting form to function in both the micro and the macro world. We would expect smooth transitions, not chaotic or awkward retro-engineering of parts and haphazardly thrown together pieces. We would expect expertly designed individual components that precisely fit their function, and systems of components that work together seamlessly in carefully choreographed dances. We would expect the elements and systems of life to work like highly engineered factories. We would expect near-perfect systems of energy acquisition and ultra-efficiency in its usage. We would expect a cascading symmetry and purposeful function at all levels, working from the smallest of building blocks to the largest of systems, uniting them all in purposeful action. We would expect to see the hallmarks of design and purpose everywhere we look. We would expect that what appears simple or chaotic is sometimes surprisingly complex, ordered, and even elegant in both function and design when examined in greater depth. We would expect nearly flawless execution of the processes of life and reproduction. We would expect to be both surprised at novel engineering solutions and gratified at discerning familiar repeating patterns. We would expect, that is, to marvel at seeing the mind of the Creator at work in His creation. What else would we expect? We would expect to find evidence of problems at all levels, telltale markers of the degradation of sin. It would be damaged by the ravages of time and in a state of decline from its original goodness as the effects of the fall work themselves out. We would expect to see those degradations both in the macro world of gene expression and in the genetic code itself, as it slowly but inexorably experiences the death promised Adam in the Garden of Eden. This is a brief and very incomplete sketch of what these two theories might expect to find as we opened Darwin's black box. Which theory's predictions has been validated by modern microbiological data? Jesus said, "Go and learn what this means." In other words, check the evidence for yourself and see. I am a Christian, with the searching and skeptical mind of an atheist. I don't want to believe anything that isn't true. I know both sides of the looking glass, and I know them with open eyes. I choose Christ's side. I invite you to join me from wherever you stand before the looking glass. That's this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and remember, you can have your religious cake and eat it too. You can have reason, respect for science, a 21st century worldview, and be a Christian.